12 habits that weaken you. Eliminate them now from your life. Practical Buddhism. There are moments in life when you feel your strength fading, not because life has become heavier, but because you are carrying habits that quietly drain your inner energy day after day. In Buddhism, the path to liberation is not only about learning profound truths, it is also about unlearning behaviors that imprison the mind, distort perception, and weaken the spirit. A person does not lose their vitality in a single blow. They lose it gradually, through 1,000 small concessions to fear, doubt, attachment, and mental noise. These weakening habits operate subtly, silently, and often unconsciously. They shape how you react, how you think, how you feel, and ultimately, how you live. Yet the power to reclaim your strength is always in your hands. According to Buddhist teaching, the human being becomes powerful not by controlling the outside world, but by eliminating the internal illusions that blur awareness and obstruct clarity. When you begin to recognize the habits that drain you, you begin to rise above them. You begin to breathe again. You begin to reclaim yourself. This text is not about moral criticism. It is a mirror, a reminder, a call back to awareness. These 12 habits are not enemies, but teachers. They reveal the hidden ways in which the mind sabotages its own potential. And once you see them clearly, they lose their power over you. This is the essence of practical Buddhism: to look deeply, to understand, and through understanding, to free yourself. In the following pages, we will walk through 5 major pillars, each one more than 4,000 words, exploring how certain habits weaken your mental structure and keep you trapped in cycles of suffering. These reflections are designed to wake up the clarity within you, the part of your mind that has never been damaged, never been stained, never been broken. When clarity returns, strength follows. Let us begin. The habit of overthinking, the silent force that destroys inner strength. Overthinking is one of the most destructive habits a human being can cultivate, not because thinking itself is harmful, but because the mind becomes trapped in a loop where thoughts stop serving life and begin feeding fear. Buddhism teaches that the mind is a powerful tool, but an undisciplined mind becomes its own tormentor. When you overthink, you create problems that do not exist, revive wounds that no longer hurt, and construct future catastrophes that will never happen. You exhaust yourself with mental simulations that drain your energy, weaken your clarity, and take you away from the present moment, which is the only place where real peace exists. Overthinking weakens your inner strength because it teaches the mind to distrust itself. Every time you replay a situation again and again, you reinforce the belief that something is wrong, that danger is near, that you must be on guard. It becomes a reflex, automatic, compulsive, and unconscious. And yet, this reflex shapes your entire emotional life. To understand the damage caused by overthinking, you must first understand its origin. Overthinking is not born from intelligence. It is born from fear. It arises when the mind feels unsafe, when it seeks control over situations that cannot be controlled, when uncertainty feels unbearable. Instead of accepting uncertainty as part of human existence, the mind creates stories to try to reduce the discomfort. But these stories often magnify fear instead of dissolving it. The mind believes it is protecting you, but in reality, it is imprisoning you within a cage built from imagined scenarios. You begin to live inside your head rather than in the world around you, and when life is lived only through thoughts, suffering multiplies. Overthinking also destroys your ability to make decisions. Every choice becomes a battlefield. The mind analyzes, questions, doubts, rethinks, reevaluates, and then circles back to the beginning. You become paralyzed not because you lack capability, but because every option feels both dangerous and insufficient. This paralysis is a form of self-sabotage. You tell yourself you are preparing, that you need more information, that waiting is safer. But life passes while you wait, and opportunities fade while you hesitate. The Buddha often warned that attachment to thought is one of the greatest traps on the spiritual path. Overthinking is precisely this attachment, the belief that the mind can think its way out of suffering, even though suffering is often created by thought itself. Another form of suffering produced by overthinking is emotional amplification. The more you think about something painful, the more painful it becomes. A small mistake becomes a catastrophe in your mind. A passing comment becomes a personal attack. A moment of insecurity becomes a lifelong defect. The mind, when left unattended, dramatizes everything. Thoughts are like drops of water. Alone, each one is harmless. But over time, they carve deep patterns into your emotional landscape, creating rivers of anxiety, valleys of self-doubt, and storms of unnecessary fear. What weakens you is not the external situation, but the internal narrative that grows around it. Buddhism teaches that suffering is born from attachment, and overthinking is a form of attachment to mental noise. You attach yourself to the belief that thinking more will lead to clarity. In reality, clarity comes from stillness. The more you think, the more confused you become, because the mind begins to chase its own tail. You cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it, and most problems created through overthinking were never real problems to begin with. They were illusions, misunderstandings, projections of fear onto the screen of reality. Overthinking also weakens your physical energy. The mind and body are deeply connected, and mental exhaustion quickly becomes physical exhaustion. When your mind is constantly active, your body responds as though you are under threat. Stress hormones increase, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, and sleep becomes disturbed. You wake up tired even when you have rested because your mind never truly stopped working. Constant mental activity drains vitality, leaving you fatigued, irritable, and unfocused. Over time, this weakens not just your emotional resilience, but your entire nervous system. In relationships, overthinking creates unnecessary distance. You begin to interpret silence as rejection, delays as disinterest, small conflicts as signs of abandonment. You read too much into every gesture, every word, every pause. This makes you defensive, anxious, and overly sensitive to imagined threats. Instead of connecting from a place of openness, you interact from a place of fear. You isolate yourself behind mental assumptions, never allowing yourself to experience the truth of the moment. Overthinking does not protect relationships. It suffocates them. From a Buddhist perspective, the root cause of overthinking is the illusion of self, the belief that there is a permanent, separate I that must be protected. When this I feels threatened, the mind begins generating thoughts to reinforce its identity and defend it from discomfort. But the more you cling to this identity, the more fragile it becomes. Overthinking is a sign that the ego feels unstable. True strength arises when you stop trying to protect a fictional identity and begin resting in awareness itself, a state that is unshaken by thoughts. Awareness is the antidote to overthinking. Awareness is not thought. It is the silent space in which thought appears. When you observe your thoughts instead of participating in them, their power dissolves. You begin to see that thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across the sky. They do not define you. They do not control you unless you allow them to. Awareness breaks the cycle of mental rumination by removing the fuel that sustains it. When you stop feeding a thought with attention, it fades naturally, like a fire that dies when you stop adding wood. Some people believe that overthinking is part of their personality, something they must simply accept. But Buddhism teaches that any habit created by the mind can be uncreated by the mind. Overthinking is not who you are. It is something you do, and anything you do you can stop doing. The first step is noticing. The second is interrupting. The third is choosing presence over mental projection. With practice, the mind becomes calmer, quieter, and more disciplined. You begin to live more fully, feel more deeply, act more decisively. When you eliminate the habit of overthinking, you reclaim your strength. You stop being exhausted by imaginary battles. You stop living in fear of things that never happen. You stop weakening yourself with self-created stories. You return to the present, where life is simple, direct, and real. This simplicity is not boring, it is liberating. The mind feels spacious, the body feels lighter, decisions become clearer, relationships become more authentic. Instead of drowning in thought, you begin to breathe again. You become strong when you no longer let your thoughts use you. You become powerful when you learn to think only when necessary and rest when thought is unnecessary. You become free when you realize that clarity does not come from thinking more, but from thinking less. If this teaching has helped you reflect, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss a new lesson that strengthens your path and deepens your awareness. The habit of emotional attachment. How clinging weakens your spirit and distorts your inner freedom. Emotional attachment is one of the most powerful forces shaping human suffering, not because emotions are harmful, but because the mind clings to them in a way that transforms natural experiences into chains. In Buddhism, attachment is identified as one of the primary roots of suffering because it binds the heart to impermanent things and creates the illusion that peace, identity, and worth must depend on something outside the self. Emotional attachment weakens a person, not through a dramatic collapse, but through a slow erosion of inner freedom. It narrows perception, distorts judgment, deepens dependency, and anchors the mind to expectations that reality can never fully satisfy. When you cling, you do not relate to life as it is. You relate to life as your fears and desires want it to be. This tension between reality and expectation is the birthplace of suffering, and the more attached you are, the more fragile you become. To understand the weakening power of attachment, you must look at its foundation. Attachment is not the same as love, care, or connection. It is not the same as appreciation, gratitude, or affection. Attachment is a psychological knot formed when the mind believes that something or someone is necessary for its stability. It is the belief that your emotional state depends on the presence, approval, or behavior of another person, or on the possession of an object, or on the outcome of an experience. This dependency becomes a form of self-abandonment. Your peace no longer belongs to you. It belongs to what you cling to, and anything that can be taken away from you leaves you vulnerable. This is why emotional attachment weakens even the strongest people. It transfers power outward and leaves the inner world unprotected. Attachment grows from a misunderstanding of impermanence. The Buddha taught that all things change. People, circumstances, emotions, desires, thoughts, and even the sense of self. When you cling, you attempt to hold something still that by nature moves. You try to secure something that by nature transforms. You attempt to possess something that by nature cannot be possessed. This creates friction in the heart, a constant tension between how things are and how you want them to be. Over time, this friction becomes exhaustion, fear, insecurity, and emotional instability. The more tightly you hold, the more pain you feel when life shifts, which it always will. Thus, attachment becomes a source of continuous weakness. One of the most destructive forms of attachment is attachment to people. It may arise from love, from fear, from loneliness, from childhood wounds, or from a deep sense of incompleteness. You begin believing that your well-being relies on another person's presence, approval, or reassurance. Your identity merges with their opinion of you. Your emotional balance depends on how they treat you. Their absence becomes a threat. Their silence becomes a punishment. Their disapproval becomes a crisis. When this happens, you lose the ability to stand on your own internal foundation. You become emotionally dependent, fragile, and deeply reactive. The fear of losing someone becomes stronger than the desire to grow, and so attachment begins eating away at your strength from within. But attachment to people is not the only weakening form. Attachment to ideas, beliefs, dreams, and expectations can also cripple your spirit. When you cling to an idealized future, you suffer every time life leads you somewhere different. When you cling to your own opinions, you become rigid, defensive, and unable to grow. When you cling to your past, you remain trapped in memories and emotions that no longer exist. In each case, attachment steals your ability to move freely in the world. You walk through life carrying invisible weights, struggling to adapt, resisting change, and fearing loss. And the energy consumed by this resistance is the energy you lose for creativity, clarity, wisdom, and peace. Emotional attachment also creates illusions about the nature of happiness. The mind tells you, "I will be happy when I have this. I will be complete when I receive that. I will be peaceful when they love me. I will feel secure when life gives me what I want." These beliefs turn happiness into a condition that depends on external factors, which means happiness can always be lost. This conditional form of happiness is unstable because the world is unstable. People change, circumstances shift, opportunities pass. If your inner stability relies on them, your peace collapses each time life deviates from your expectations. True strength arises when happiness is unconditional, when it is rooted in inner awareness rather than external attachment. Another weakening effect of attachment is fear. The more attached you are to something, the more afraid you are of losing it. Fear arises naturally when the mind clings, and fear is one of the greatest enemies of spiritual strength. Fear narrows your vision, it distorts your thinking, it limits your choices, it pushes you to cling even tighter. Fear becomes both the cause and the consequence of attachment, creating a cycle that drains your emotional resilience. You begin making decisions not from clarity, but from desperation. You stay in situations that hurt you because the fear of losing them seems worse than the suffering they cause. You abandon your authenticity to protect what you cling to, forgetting that anything gained through self-betrayal is not truly gained. This cycle weakens your spirit because it teaches you to live in reaction rather than intention. Buddhism teaches that the root of attachment is ignorance, ignorance of your true nature. When you do not know who you are beyond roles, emotions, thoughts, relationships, and possessions, you cling to these things to form an identity. But identities built on impermanent things crumble. When they crumble, you feel as if you are crumbling. This illusion is painful but transformative. The collapse of attachment often becomes the doorway to awakening. When the mind finally sees that nothing external can provide permanent stability, it turns inward. It seeks the unchanging ground beneath experience. Awareness itself. Awareness does not cling. Awareness does not fear loss. Awareness does not depend on anything outside of itself. When you live from this state of awareness, attachment dissolves naturally, and with it dissolves the suffering created by clinging. Another subtle but destructive effect of emotional attachment is self-distortion. When you cling to someone or something, you begin shaping yourself to protect the attachment. You suppress your needs, you silence your intuition, you ignore red flags, you compromise your boundaries. You agree to things that hurt you. You pretend to be someone you are not. This self-distortion is a profound form of weakness because it disconnects you from your inner truth. The more you distort yourself, the more you weaken your sense of identity, dignity, and direction. Attachment pushes you into emotional shapes that do not match who you truly are, and each distortion leaves a scar on your inner being. Over time, you forget what your authentic voice sounds like. Strength cannot grow where authenticity has been abandoned. Attachment also corrupts the experience of love. Many people confuse attachment with love, but they are opposites. Love is expansive, attachment is constrictive. Love is generous, attachment is possessive. Love allows freedom, attachment demands control. Love nourishes the spirit, attachment drains it. When you cling to someone, you stop seeing them as they are and begin seeing them as a source of security. You project your needs onto them. You fear losing them. You try to mold them into what makes you feel safe. This is not love, this is dependency. True love emerges only when the heart is free, free from fear, free from expectation, free from the need to possess. When you love freely, you become strong, because your love is not built on fear of loss, but on abundance. Attachment weakens love by turning it into a contract rather than a gift. In addition, attachment prevents emotional maturity. When you rely on external things to regulate your inner state, you never develop the ability to self-soothe, self-reflect, or self-guide. You remain emotionally dependent, unable to stand alone during challenges. This dependence weakens resilience. Instead of meeting discomfort with wisdom, you seek escape through the object of your attachment. Instead of meeting loneliness with introspection, you cling more tightly. Instead of meeting fear with awareness, you grasp for reassurance. Attachment becomes a substitute for inner growth, and without growth, inner strength cannot flourish. One of the most revealing insights from Buddhism is that attachment persists not because the object is valuable, but because the mind fears emptiness. Emptiness, in Buddhist terms, is not despair, but spaciousness, the absence of clinging, the openness of the mind, the stillness of awareness. When you are not attached, the mind feels weightless. But this weightlessness can feel frightening to someone used to emotional anchors. The mind prefers familiarity, even if the familiar is painful. Clinging feels safer than letting go, but safety built on illusion is fragile. Freedom built on awareness is indestructible. To overcome attachment, you must learn to tolerate the space created when clinging dissolves. This space is not emptiness, it is clarity. Another weakening effect of attachment is the destruction of inner peace. When you cling to something, your mind is constantly disturbed by thoughts of it. You think about losing it, protecting it, controlling it, fixing it, predicting its changes, and securing its presence. This mental agitation keeps you from resting. Peace becomes impossible because your mind is always negotiating conditions for peace to exist. The more attached you are, the more unstable your peace becomes. Inner peace arises only when the mind is unburdened, unclinging, and free. To release attachment, you must first see it clearly. Awareness is always the first step. You cannot let go of something you do not recognize. Once you see the pattern of clinging, you can explore the fear beneath it. Often, the fear is of losing safety, identity, or connection. When you sit with this fear rather than run from it, the grip of attachment loosens. Letting go is not an act of force, it is an act of understanding. When you understand the nature of the thing you cling to, its impermanence, its limitations, its inability to provide permanent satisfaction, the heart releases naturally. You cannot cling to something you truly see. Letting go does not mean losing. It means making room. When you release attachment, you make room for clarity, for authentic love, for inner stability, for growth, for freedom. You make room for life to unfold without the weight of your expectations. You make room for relationships to breathe, evolve, and strengthen without fear-based control. You make room for yourself to grow into someone more resilient, more aware, more calm. The final truth is this: attachment weakens you because it teaches you to seek strength outside of yourself. The moment you stop seeking strength outside, you stop being weak. The moment you reclaim your inner ground, you stop fearing loss. The moment you learn to love without clinging, you discover a strength greater than anything attachment ever offered. You become someone who can walk through change without collapsing. You become someone who can love without losing yourself. You become someone who can release what leaves and embrace what comes. This is the essence of spiritual strength. If this teaching has helped you see your own attachments more clearly, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss a new lesson that strengthens your inner path and deepens your awareness. The habit of self-doubt. The inner voice that weakens your strength before the world ever can self-doubt is one of the most corrosive forces within the human mind, not because it makes you question yourself occasionally, but because it becomes a constant whisper that undermines your confidence every time you try to grow, act, or trust your own path. In Buddhism, the mind is described as a garden. If you plant seeds of fear, the mind grows fear. If you plant seeds of clarity, the mind grows clarity. Self-doubt is a seed that spreads like a weed, choking potential, suffocating inner strength, and weakening your ability to perceive your own capabilities. It is not born of truth, but of conditioning. It is taught, repeated, and internalized until the voice of doubt begins to sound like your own. Yet no one is born doubting themselves. Self-doubt is acquired, and because it is acquired, it can be unlearned. But before it is unlearned, it must be fully understood, not as an enemy to fight, but as a psychological illusion that collapses when brought into awareness. The weakening power of self-doubt lies in its subtlety. It does not shout, it does not confront you directly. It whispers in the background, "You're not capable, you will fail, others know better, you're not ready, you're not good enough, your voice doesn't matter, someone else can do this better than you." These whispers feel like caution, humility, or realism, but they are in fact chains that bind you from within. They limit your choices, shrink your world, and shape your identity around inadequacy. Over time, self-doubt becomes a habitual lens, coloring everything you try to do. You begin to question even your strengths. You begin to reinterpret your successes as luck. You begin to fear taking steps forward because the voice of doubt convinces you that failure is inevitable. This habit becomes deeply weakening because it sabotages your life before external obstacles ever appear. Most people are defeated by their minds long before they are defeated by circumstances. Self-doubt often originates from childhood experiences, environments where mistakes were punished harshly, achievements were minimized, or vulnerability was mocked. A child exposed to such environments learns to distrust their own abilities, intuition, and voice. They internalize the belief that they are inadequate or incapable. This internalization persists into adulthood, long after the original source of doubt has disappeared. The mind recreates the criticism it once heard. It becomes its own oppressor. In Buddhism, this is seen as karmic conditioning. Not karma as punishment, but karma as patterns that repeat until awareness breaks them. Self-doubt is nothing more than a pattern. But patterns feel like reality when they go unquestioned. Self-doubt also grows through comparison. In a world filled with external validation, curated success, and constant visibility of others' achievements, the mind begins to measure itself against illusions. You compare your inner struggles to someone else's polished exterior. You compare your journey to their destination. You compare your vulnerabilities to their strengths. This comparison is inherently unfair, yet the mind engages in it repeatedly. Comparison becomes a form of self-criticism. It creates insecurity, jealousy, fear, and discouragement. It strengthens the belief that others are more capable, more deserving, more talented, more prepared, And every time you compare yourself, you lose power. You give another person the authority to define your worth. Self-doubt thrives in this environment. One of the most weakening aspects of self-doubt is its ability to distort memory. When you doubt yourself, you reinterpret your past experiences through a negative filter. You forget your victories. You dismiss your achievements. You minimize your resilience. You amplify your failures. You remember the moments where you struggled and forget the moments where you succeeded. The mind begins to construct a narrative. I always fail. Things never work out for me. I'm not capable of handling challenges. This narrative becomes self-fulfilling because the mind seeks evidence to confirm its beliefs. You unconsciously act in ways that match the story you tell yourself. Thus, self-doubt shapes not only your emotions, but your behavior, your outcomes, and eventually your entire identity. Emotional hesitation is another weakness created by self-doubt. When you doubt yourself, you hesitate to act. You delay decisions. You second-guess your choices. You analyze every possibility until you are paralyzed by fear of choosing wrong. This paralysis steals opportunities. It leads to stagnation. It prevents growth. Life moves while you hesitate. The mind tells you that you are being careful, thoughtful, or responsible. But the truth is that self-doubt prevents you from trusting your own ability to navigate consequences. This lack of trust weakens your spirit because you lose the chance to discover your strength through action. Growth requires movement, and movement requires self-trust. Self-doubt also weakens your voice. When you doubt your worth, you silence yourself in conversations, relationships, and opportunities. You speak less, you share less, you ask for less. You shrink to avoid judgment or rejection. You convince yourself that your perspective is unimportant. This shrinking becomes habitual. You begin living small. You diminish your own potential to avoid the possibility of criticism. But criticism is not what weakens you. Silencing yourself is. The Buddha taught that right speech emerges from clarity, but clarity cannot emerge when fear governs your throat. Self-doubt makes your voice tremble, not because your message is weak, but because your belief in yourself is cracked. Another destructive effect of self-doubt is that it attracts people and situations that reinforce it. When you doubt yourself, you accept relationships where you are undervalued, workplaces where you are overlooked, friendships where you are taken for granted. You tolerate disrespect because you believe you cannot do better. You stay in situations that diminish you because you assume you are not capable of something higher. This perpetuates the cycle of doubt. The external world mirrors your internal beliefs, and the reflection convinces you that your doubt is justified. It is not. It is merely echoed. One of the deepest weaknesses self-doubt creates is the fragmentation of identity. When you doubt yourself, you split into two selves. The self that wants to act, express, create, grow, and the self that doubts, hesitates, and restrains. This internal conflict drains immense energy. You become exhausted not from doing too much, but from fighting yourself. Every step forward is resisted by a step backward. Every idea is attacked by fear. Every dream is suffocated by insecurity. This fragmentation weakens not only your spirit, but also your motivation, discipline, and clarity. A divided mind cannot act with strength. From a Buddhist perspective, self-doubt arises from misidentification. You confuse who you are with passing thoughts and temporary emotions. When a thought of insecurity arises, you believe it is true. When a feeling of inadequacy appears, you assume it reflects reality. But the Buddha taught that thoughts and emotions are impermanent. They come and go like clouds in the sky. They cannot define the sky. Similarly, your thoughts cannot define your inner nature. Self-doubt persists because you identify with it. You say, "I am insecure, I am not capable, I am weak." This identification strengthens the illusion. But when you learn to observe doubt without identifying with it, its power dissolves. You begin to see self-doubt as a mental event, not a personal truth. Self-doubt also arises from attachment to perfection. When you believe that you must succeed flawlessly, any imperfection feels like failure. This expectation is unrealistic and harmful. Buddhism teaches that life is shaped by effort, intention, and presence, not perfection. When you cling to perfection, you fear mistakes. When you fear mistakes, you stop trying. This weakens your growth. True strength emerges not from perfection, but from resilience. Mistakes are teachers, imperfections are opportunities. Doubt arises when you forget that growth is a process, not an outcome. Another weakening effect of self-doubt is emotional dependency. When you do not trust your own judgment, you begin relying excessively on external opinions. You ask for advice constantly. You seek validation from others. You fear making decisions without approval. This dependency weakens your autonomy. You lose the ability to guide your own life. You become easily influenced, manipulated, or controlled because you believe others know better than you. This belief disconnects you from your intuition. Your intuition is a quiet but powerful source of wisdom. Yet self-doubt drowns it out. You stop hearing yourself because you are too busy listening to fears. Self-doubt also weakens your ability to face challenges. When you believe you are incapable, challenges feel insurmountable. You give up easily. You avoid difficulties. You retreat from obstacles instead of meeting them with courage. This avoidance reinforces the belief that you cannot handle hardship. But the inability is not real. It is learned. Strength is built through challenge. A life without challenge becomes a life without growth. Self-doubt deprives you of the experiences that would teach you how strong you actually are. One of the profound truths of Buddhist practice is that doubt is one of the 5 hindrances, mental forces that obstruct clarity and spiritual awakening. Doubt is considered especially harmful because it undermines faith in your own potential. Many people interpret faith through a religious lens, but in Buddhism, faith means confidence in your ability to grow, understand, awaken, and transform. When doubt weakens this faith, the path becomes foggy, effort becomes inconsistent, progress becomes slow. Doubt tells you that you cannot reach the destination, so you stop walking. But the destination is not outside you, it is within you. To doubt your own path is to doubt your own essence. Self-doubt also creates emotional instability. When your confidence depends on external outcomes, success, praise, or approval, your sense of worth fluctuates constantly. If someone compliments you, you feel capable. If someone criticizes you, you feel worthless. If something goes well, you believe in yourself. If something goes poorly, you collapse. This instability weakens your ability to remain grounded during challenges. A strong person is not someone who never feels doubt, but someone whose self-worth remains stable regardless of external fluctuations. This stability arises from inner knowing, not from external validation. To overcome self-doubt, you must understand that doubt is not a fact, but a feeling. Feelings are transient. They lose power when observed. When doubt arises, you can say, "This is doubt. It is a thought. It is not truth." This simple recognition weakens the belief behind the doubt. Over time, the pattern loses strength. You begin acting despite doubt. Action in the presence of doubt is what builds true confidence. Confidence is not built through success alone. It is built through willingness to act even when you feel uncertain. Every action becomes evidence that doubt is a liar. Another technique from Buddhism is self-compassion. Self-doubt grows in harsh internal environments, inner worlds filled with self-criticism and unrealistic expectations. Self-compassion softens the mind. It allows you to acknowledge your imperfections without shame. It lets you grow without fear. When you treat yourself with kindness, doubt loses its authority. You no longer believe the voice that tells you you are unworthy, because compassion shows you that worthiness is inherent, not earned. Self-inquiry is also essential. When doubt arises, ask yourself, whose voice is this? Often, the voice of doubt is not your own. It is the inherited voice of a parent, teacher, bully, partner, or society. It echoes past criticisms, past wounds, past comparisons. When you recognize the origin of the voice, you stop giving it your identity. You realize, this is not me, this is conditioning. And when something is seen as conditioning, it can be released. Self-doubt also dissolves when you develop inner stillness. Meditation allows you to observe your mind without reacting to it. You begin seeing doubt as a cloud drifting across the sky of awareness. It appears, it dissolves. It has no inherent power. The stillness beneath the doubt is your true nature. The more you rest in stillness, the less you are shaken by mental noise. A calm mind cannot be dominated by doubt. Doubt requires mental agitation to survive. Another path is to act before doubt stops you. Most people wait to feel confident before acting. But confidence often appears after action, not before. When you act, you build evidence that you can handle the situation. This evidence weakens doubt. Over time, your identity transforms from someone who doubts themselves to someone who acts despite fear. This is true strength. This is inner transformation. You must also stop seeking permission to live your life. Self-doubt makes you believe you need approval to move forward. But your path belongs to you. Your dreams belong to you. Your voice belongs to you. No one else can grant you what is already yours. The moment you give yourself permission to act, you become free. The world does not weaken you, your hesitation does. Finally, the most powerful truth. You do not need to eliminate self-doubt to be strong. You need only to stop obeying it. Doubt can speak, but you do not have to listen. Doubt can appear, but you do not have to surrender. Doubt can whisper, but your awareness can silence it. When you begin living from awareness rather than fear, you become unshakable. You discover that strength has always been within you. Doubt merely covered it like dust on a mirror. Wipe the mirror and your reflection becomes clear again. You are not who doubt says you are. You are who you become when you rise above it. If this lesson has helped you recognize the illusions of self-doubt, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss teachings that deepen your awareness and strengthen your inner path. The habit of avoidance, how running from discomfort silently weakens your mind, your spirit, and your destiny. Avoidance is one of the most deceptively weakening habits a person can develop. It does not scream, it does not confront you, it does not announce its presence. Avoidance is silent, subtle, and comfortable, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. It disguises itself as protection, as self-care, as temporary relief, as a harmless escape. But over time, avoidance becomes a pattern that drains your strength, distorts your perception of reality, weakens your resilience, and prevents you from stepping into the life you are meant to live. In Buddhism, avoidance is considered a form of aversion, the mind's instinctive reaction to discomfort. Yet aversion does not eliminate the discomfort. It merely postpones it, magnifies it, and spreads it into every corner of your life. What weakens you is not the discomfort itself, but your refusal to face it. Avoidance grows stronger in the shadows, and those shadows grow longer each time you turn away. To understand avoidance, you must see how deeply rooted it is in human psychology. The mind is naturally drawn to pleasure and repelled by pain. This tendency is biological, emotional, and instinctive. But in spiritual terms, it is also the source of suffering. When the mind avoids discomfort, it becomes ruled by fear. Instead of moving with life, it begins resisting life. Instead of expanding, it contracts. Instead of evolving, it stagnates. Avoidance weakens the spirit because it teaches you to shrink from experiences that would strengthen you. It convinces you that discomfort is dangerous, when in truth, discomfort is the birthplace of growth, clarity, and awakening. Avoidance appears in many forms: avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding responsibilities, avoiding making a decision, avoiding emotional vulnerability, avoiding opportunities because you fear failure, avoiding facing your past, avoiding silence because it forces you to listen to your own mind, avoiding your own potential because it requires effort and uncertainty. Each avoidance seems small, but together they shape a life ruled by fear instead of intention. Avoidance weakens you not only by preventing growth, but by reinforcing the belief that you are incapable of facing what challenges you. Every time you avoid something difficult, your mind learns the wrong lesson, that you cannot handle it, and this belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Avoidance often begins with the desire to protect oneself. Maybe you faced pain before and do not want to feel it again. Maybe you were criticized, rejected, or judged, and now your mind avoids situations where those feelings might reappear. Maybe you failed once, and now you avoid taking risks to avoid repeating that failure. But the problem is that avoidance does not protect you, it imprisons you. Pain avoided becomes suffering. Fear avoided becomes paralysis. Responsibilities avoided become burdens. The longer you avoid something, the larger it grows in your mind. A task you avoid for one day becomes mildly uncomfortable. Avoid it for a week, and it becomes intimidating. Avoid it for a month, and it becomes overwhelming. Avoid it for a year, and it becomes a mountain that steals your peace every time you think about it. Avoidance expands the very discomfort you are trying to escape. One of the most weakening forms of avoidance is emotional avoidance. When you avoid feeling your emotions, you push them into the subconscious. They do not disappear. They accumulate. They transform into anxiety, irritability, restlessness, numbness, or emotional instability. Unfelt emotions linger in the body and mind, creating tension and confusion. Avoidance teaches you to fear your own emotional landscape, as though your emotions are volcanic eruptions waiting to destroy you. But emotions are not dangerous. They are messages. They are signals of what your mind and heart want you to understand. When you avoid emotions, you avoid understanding yourself. And a person who does not understand themselves is easily weakened by life. Another destructive form of avoidance is avoiding challenges. Challenges are the training ground of the spirit. They build resilience, discipline, focus, problem-solving ability, and inner strength. Every challenge you overcome expands your confidence. Every challenge you avoid shrinks your confidence. Avoidance creates fragility. It conditions the mind to panic at the first sign of difficulty. Instead of adapting and responding, you retreat. Instead of learning and growing, you hide. The mind becomes used to comfort and resists anything unfamiliar. This resistance weakens your capacity to navigate life's inevitable difficulties. A life without challenge becomes a life without expansion. You become mentally soft, spiritually untested, and easy to break. Avoidance also affects relationships. Many relationships fail not because of lack of love, but because of avoidance. Avoidance of difficult conversations leads to resentment. Avoidance of vulnerability leads to emotional distance. Avoidance of expressing needs leads to miscommunication. Avoidance of conflict creates tension that eventually explodes. Avoidance convinces you that silence is safer than honesty, but silence corrodes bonds over time. True intimacy requires courage, the courage to face discomfort, to speak truth, to express hurt, to listen without defensiveness. Avoidance weakens relationships by replacing courage with fear, One of the most subtle ways avoidance weakens you is by damaging your sense of identity. When you continually avoid things, you internalize the belief that you are someone who runs, someone who cannot face difficulties, someone who is defined by fear. This identity becomes a limitation. You begin making decisions based on who you think you are, not on who you could become. Avoidance shapes your self-image in negative ways. You see yourself as fragile, incapable, or unworthy, not because you truly are, but because you have not given yourself the chance to see your strength. Identity is shaped by action. The more you avoid, the more avoidance becomes who you believe you are. Avoidance also creates illusions about time. When you avoid something, you tell yourself you will deal with it later, but later is a lie the mind uses to avoid discomfort now. Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week becomes next year. The mind convinces itself that avoidance buys time, but avoidance actually steals time. You spend days, months, or even years with unresolved situations draining your mental energy. You waste time worrying about things you could have resolved if you faced them directly. The illusion of later keeps you in a cycle of unfinished tasks, unfinished healing, unfinished conversations, unfinished dreams. Avoidance weakens you because it places your life on hold. Another weakening consequence of avoidance is that it blocks growth. Growth always requires stepping into the unknown. It requires discomfort, uncertainty, trial and error, learning through experience. Avoidance prevents you from entering this territory. It keeps you in the familiar, even when the familiar is unhealthy. You cannot grow while clinging to comfort. The lotus flower grows in mud. The human spirit grows in challenge. Avoidance tries to protect you from mud, but in doing so it deprives you of the chance to bloom. Avoidance also weakens your intuition. When you avoid facing reality, you disconnect from your inner knowing. Intuition thrives in honesty, clarity, and presence. It cannot guide you if you hide from the truth. Avoidance clouds the mind. It creates denial, confusion, and emotional fog. You stop hearing the quiet inner voice that knows what you need, what you must change, what is unhealthy, and what direction your life must take. Avoidance silences this inner voice by drowning it in distraction and fear. When intuition is silenced, you become vulnerable to making choices from impulse or insecurity instead of wisdom. Avoidance of the past is another common weakening habit. Many people avoid facing unresolved memories, traumas, or mistakes because they fear the emotions attached to them. But the past does not lose power through avoidance. It loses power through awareness. The past that is unexamined becomes an invisible puppeteer, controlling your reactions, fears, and beliefs. Avoidance keeps old wounds alive. Instead of healing, they deepen. Instead of fading, they echo. Avoidance traps you in cycles that repeat because you never confront the source. Facing the past does not mean reliving it. It means understanding it so it loses its ability to control your present. Another weakening form of avoidance is avoiding decisions. Decision-making is a fundamental aspect of personal power. Each decision is an expression of intention, clarity, and responsibility. When you avoid decisions, you surrender your power to circumstance or to other people. You drift rather than direct. You react rather than choose. Avoiding decisions weakens your autonomy, leaving your life shaped by external forces rather than internal direction. Even indecision is a decision, the decision to let fear guide you. Avoidance also affects physical and mental health. Avoiding rest leads to burnout. Avoiding activity leads to stagnation. Avoiding medical issues leads to worsening conditions. Avoiding stress leads to chronic anxiety. Avoiding self-reflection leads to emotional numbness. The body and mind require attention, honesty, and active participation. Avoidance weakens both because it creates a disconnect between what you need and what you do. In Buddhist teaching, avoidance is closely linked to suffering because it reinforces delusion, the mistaken belief that running away can protect you from life. But suffering grows in the space left unaddressed. The Buddha taught that liberation arises not from escaping reality, but from turning toward it with awareness. Avoidance teaches the opposite, that salvation lies in distraction. But distraction only postpones awakening. Every moment of avoidance is a moment lost from your own evolution. One of the most important truths is that avoidance amplifies fear. The more you avoid something, the scarier it becomes. You imagine outcomes far worse than reality. You create monsters out of possibilities. You catastrophize. You dramatize. Your mind fills the unknown with darkness. But fear often dissolves when faced directly. The imagined pain is almost always greater than the actual pain. Avoidance steals the opportunity to discover this truth. It keeps you trapped in fear that would evaporate if met with courage. Avoidance also turns obstacles into walls. Most obstacles are manageable when approached early and directly, but avoidance allows them to grow unchecked. They multiply in complexity. They expand in consequence. What could have been resolved with a small step now requires a large one. What could have been handled calmly now requires crisis management. Avoidance transforms small challenges into overwhelming burdens. And this transformation weakens your confidence and increases your fear of facing future challenges. One of the most weakening truths about avoidance is that it disconnects you from reality. When you avoid things, you create a gap between yourself and the truth of your life. This gap becomes filled with assumptions, fears, fantasies, and distortions. The longer you avoid something, the less you understand it. You begin constructing stories about it rather than experiencing it. Your perception becomes warped. Reality becomes a distant landscape, obscured by fog. You cannot live fully while disconnected from reality. Avoidance weakens your mind's ability to see clearly, act wisely, and respond effectively. Avoidance also weakens your discipline. Each time you avoid something, you reinforce the habit of seeking comfort rather than challenge. This habit becomes pervasive. You begin avoiding not only major discomforts, but even small ones. Waking up early, exercising, working on your goals, reading, meditating, practicing skills, initiating difficult conversations. Discipline erodes. And without discipline, even the strongest potential remains unrealized. Avoidance is the enemy of discipline because it prioritizes ease over effort. But effort is the soil where growth grows. Another way avoidance weakens you is by creating regret. The things you avoid today often become the regrets you carry tomorrow. Opportunities lost, words unsaid, connections broken, skills unlearned. Dreams unpursued. Avoidance sells short-term comfort at the cost of long-term fulfillment, and regret weighs heavily on the spirit. It drains energy, self-esteem, and hope. Avoidance weakens your future by stealing your present. Overcoming avoidance requires courage, awareness, and intention, not the absence of fear, but the decision to move despite fear. The first step is noticing the impulse to avoid. The mind often reacts automatically to discomfort. When you bring this impulse into awareness, you create space between the discomfort and your reaction. In this space, you have the power to choose differently. Awareness dissolves the automatic nature of avoidance. The next step is approaching discomfort gradually. You do not need to face the entire mountain at once. You only need to take one step. Small steps weaken avoidance by showing your mind that discomfort is survivable. Every step toward discomfort expands your confidence. Every step away from discomfort shrinks it. Courage grows through repetition, not intensity. Another essential practice is changing your relationship with discomfort. Discomfort is not a threat. It is a signal of growth. It means you are stretching your boundaries, challenging your mind, and moving into new territory. When you stop fearing discomfort, avoidance loses its foundation. You begin meeting challenges with curiosity rather than resistance. You begin seeing discomfort as a teacher rather than an enemy. You must also embrace responsibility. Avoidance thrives on the belief that someone else will fix things, that time will solve problems, that circumstances will arrange themselves. But responsibility is empowering. It brings your life back into your own hands. When you take responsibility, you face things directly because you understand that your growth, your peace, and your destiny depend on your actions. Another key is building tolerance for uncertainty. Avoidance often arises from fear of the unknown, but the unknown is where life happens. When you learn to tolerate uncertainty, you stop needing perfect solutions before acting. You act, learn, adapt, and continue. Strength emerges not from certainty, but from flexibility. Finally, you must cultivate presence. Avoidance pulls you away from the present moment into imagined fears. Presence brings you back. When you are present, you face reality as it is, not as your fear imagines it. Presence grounds you. It gives you clarity. It dissolves the panic that fuels avoidance. A mind that is present does not run. It remains, observes, responds. You overcome avoidance not by trying to eliminate fear, but by refusing to let fear control your life. Each time you face something you once avoided, you reclaim a piece of your power. Each time you take a step toward discomfort, you strengthen your spirit. Each time you embrace reality rather than escape it, you awaken a deeper part of yourself. Avoidance weakens, but awareness strengthens. Avoidance contracts, but courage expands. Avoidance hides, but presence reveals. A strong life is not built on the absence of difficulty, but on the willingness to face it. If this teaching has helped you see the weakening effects of avoidance more clearly, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss new lessons that deepen your awareness and strengthen your inner path. The habit of living on autopilot. How lack of awareness quietly weakens your mind, your purpose, and your humanity. Living on autopilot is one of the most pervasive yet unnoticed habits weakening the modern human being. Unlike dramatic mistakes or destructive behaviors, autopilot is subtle. It slips into your daily routines, your conversations, your habits, your reactions, your thoughts, and even your sense of self. It convinces you that life is simply happening and that all you can do is follow along. But practical Buddhism teaches that awareness, not circumstances, is what shapes the quality of your life. When you live without awareness, your days blend into each other, your actions lose intention, your relationships lose depth, your creativity fades, and your inner strength dissolves quietly, piece by piece, week by week, year by year. Autopilot does not weaken you in a single blow. It weakens you through forgetfulness, the forgetting of who you are, what you want, and why you are here. Autopilot begins innocently. You wake up, check your phone, follow your routines, go through your tasks, speak to people, eat, think, react, worry, repeat. Nothing seems particularly harmful. But underneath this repetition, your consciousness begins to fade. You stop questioning, you stop choosing, you stop noticing details, you stop listening deeply, you stop feeling fully, you stop being present in your own life. Awareness becomes diluted, and when awareness weakens, everything built on awareness, your choices, your focus, your emotional balance, your self-control, your spiritual perception, weakens with it. The most dangerous form of weakness is the one you cannot see. One of the greatest dangers of autopilot is that it creates the illusion of living when you are merely existing. You move, but you do not grow. You speak, but you do not connect. You think, but you do not reflect. You react, but you do not choose. You work, but you do not create meaning. You survive, but you do not awaken. Autopilot traps you in a mechanical rhythm, one that numbs the mind and keeps the spirit asleep. Over time, this pattern produces a deep sense of emptiness, a feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems fine on the surface. This emptiness is not caused by lack of accomplishments, it is caused by lack of presence. Autopilot weakens your mind by reducing its sensitivity. The more you repeat behaviors unconsciously, the less your brain engages with the present moment. Neural pathways become static. Curiosity fades, creativity declines, focus becomes scattered. The mind becomes dull, restless, or easily overwhelmed. Autopilot transforms the mind into a machine that responds out of habit rather than insight. This makes you vulnerable to manipulation, distraction, and emotional instability. A mind without awareness is easily swayed by external forces because it has forgotten how to observe from within. Another weakening effect of autopilot is the erosion of emotional intelligence. When you are not fully present, you cannot perceive the subtle signals in your relationships: tone, silence, discomfort, affection, needs, boundaries. You respond with automatic patterns rather than mindful awareness. You misunderstand others more easily. You react impulsively. You project your assumptions onto the situation. Over time, relationships suffer because you are not truly there. People feel unseen or unheard. Conflict arises from misalignment rather than malice. Autopilot damages emotional intelligence because awareness is the foundation of empathy, connection, and understanding. Autopilot also weakens your sense of purpose. When you move through life unconsciously, you lose touch with what matters to you. You forget your dreams, you postpone your goals, you accept routines that drain your spirit. You settle for circumstances that do not reflect your potential. Purpose requires reflection, intention, and deliberate action. It requires questioning, choosing, and adjusting. But autopilot replaces intention with inertia. You keep doing what you've always done, not because it is right for you, but because it is familiar. Familiarity becomes your comfort zone, and your comfort zone becomes your cage. Purpose cannot grow inside a cage. Another destructive effect of autopilot is that it strengthens unconscious fears, beliefs, and wounds. When you live without awareness, unresolved emotions continue influencing your decisions. Old traumas shape your reactions. Childhood conditioning shapes your worldview. Unexamined beliefs shape your self-worth. Autopilot keeps these forces hidden, preventing you from healing. Without awareness, you repeat the same patterns in different situations, wondering why life keeps bringing you the same challenges. The problem is not life, it is unconsciousness. Autopilot freezes your inner evolution. Autopilot also weakens your ability to experience joy. Joy requires presence. It requires noticing the beauty in small moments, feeling gratitude spontaneously, sensing the richness of existence beyond routine. When you live mechanically, joy becomes rare or diluted. You might experience temporary pleasure, but not deep fulfillment. Pleasure distracts. Joy awakens. Autopilot leaves you with distraction instead of awakening, with numbness instead of vitality. Over time, this leads to boredom, dissatisfaction, or even depression, not because life is empty, but because awareness has been dimmed. One of the most weakening forms of autopilot is habitual thought patterns. Most people think the same thoughts every day: worries, criticisms, assumptions, fears, expectations, rehearsed conversations, imaginary scenarios. These repetitive thoughts shape your emotional experience. Autopilot allows them to run unchecked. You become a passive observer of your own mind, carried by its currents without steering. This weakens your ability to direct your energy, choose your perspective, or anchor yourself in clarity. Thought patterns built through autopilot become mental prisons, confining you to identities you never consciously chose. Another subtle weakening effect is the loss of authenticity. When you are not fully aware, you begin imitating what others expect of you. You adopt behaviors unconsciously. You mirror social norms without evaluating them. You respond based on conditioning rather than truth. You gradually drift away from your authentic self. This disconnection produces inner conflict, an uncomfortable feeling that you are not living as who you truly are. Autopilot turns you into a version of yourself created by circumstances rather than consciousness. Strength, however, comes from living truthfully, intentionally, and self-aware. Without awareness, authenticity becomes impossible. Autopilot also amplifies unhealthy habits. Because habit thrives in unconsciousness, behaviors that do not serve you, overeating, procrastination, excessive screen use, toxic thought cycles, unhealthy relationships, emotional avoidance, grow stronger when you are not present. You repeat them automatically, even when you know they harm you. You feel powerless to stop because autopilot takes over the decision-making process. Awareness is the only force that can interrupt these patterns. Without awareness, they deepen, weaken your discipline, and shape the direction of your life. Another way autopilot weakens you is by numbing your intuition. Intuition is the inner wisdom that guides you toward what is right, what is healthy, what is aligned with your path. But intuition speaks softly. It requires stillness, attentiveness, and presence. Autopilot fills your mind with noise, leaving no quiet space for intuition to be heard. As a result, you make choices based on habit rather than insight. You stay in situations that drain you. You miss warnings that could protect you. You overlook opportunities that would elevate you. Intuition cannot survive in a mind that is always elsewhere. The habit of autopilot also weakens your spiritual awareness. Spirituality is not found in dramatic revelations. It is found in noticing the subtle movements of the mind, the breath, the body, the emotions, and the present moment. It is found in observing without judgment, acting with intention, and living with compassion. Autopilot blinds you to these subtle realities. It keeps you trapped at the surface of experience, disconnected from the deeper layers of existence where peace and wisdom reside. A person living on autopilot may appear functional, but internally they feel disconnected from themselves, from others, and from life. Autopilot also weakens your discipline and resilience. When you live mechanically, you are less likely to challenge yourself, set goals, or initiate change. You settle into routines that require little effort, but easy routines create weak minds. Strength grows when you push yourself consciously, not out of force but out of intention. When awareness fades, so does discipline. You avoid things that require effort, you procrastinate, you lose momentum. This creates a cycle of stagnation that is difficult to break, because autopilot convinces you that change must come from inspiration rather than choice. But growth begins with awareness. Without awareness, discipline cannot survive. Another weakening consequence of autopilot is that it creates emotional numbness. You stop feeling deeply, not only painful emotions but also joyful ones. Your emotional range shrinks. Life becomes predictable, flat, or repetitive. This numbness is not a sign that life has lost meaning, but that awareness has been replaced by routine. When you live consciously, even simple experiences feel rich. When you live mechanically, even extraordinary experiences feel dull. Awareness brings color to life. Autopilot turns everything into grayscale. Autopilot weakens your decision-making ability. Decisions require clarity, reflection, and intentionality. Autopilot bypasses all three. You either avoid decisions or make them impulsively. You repeat old choices rather than evaluating new possibilities. You follow familiar paths even when they no longer serve you. Over time, this makes you feel powerless, as though your life is happening to you rather than being shaped by you. This weakening of agency is one of the most dangerous effects of autopilot because it convinces you that you have no control over your destiny. But destiny is shaped by awareness, not by routine. Autopilot also weakens your memory and cognitive sharpness. When you are not present, your brain encodes fewer details. Days pass without leaving impressions. Experiences blur together. You forget conversations, tasks, or important moments because your mind was elsewhere. This weakening of memory is not a sign of aging, it is a sign of inattention. The brain remembers what awareness touches. What goes unnoticed cannot be stored. Awareness strengthens the mind. Autopilot weakens it. Another weakening effect of autopilot is that it feeds dissatisfaction. When you are not fully present, you search for stimulation, scrolling endlessly, multitasking constantly, consuming without absorbing. This creates restlessness. You feel unsatisfied, not because life lacks meaning, but because you have lost the ability to immerse yourself in the present moment. Satisfaction arises from presence, not from intensity. Autopilot steals this satisfaction by keeping your mind elsewhere. Autopilot also prevents you from seeing your own progress. When you live without awareness, you fail to notice your transformation, your resilience, your healing, your small victories. You feel stuck even when you are growing because your mind is not fully engaged with your journey. Awareness allows you to witness your evolution. Autopilot blinds you to it, weakening your motivation and self-belief. One of the most damaging effects of autopilot is that it disconnects you from the sacredness of life. Life is made of moments, breaths, sensations, conversations, choices, fleeting experiences. When you live mechanically, you miss the sacredness embedded in the ordinary. You miss the beauty in simple things. You miss the depth in quiet moments. You miss the wisdom hidden in challenges. Spiritual strength comes from seeing the sacred in the present. Autopilot hides it behind layers of distraction. To overcome autopilot, you must cultivate awareness intentionally. Awareness does not return automatically. It returns through practice, small, frequent reminders to wake up, to breathe, to notice. One of the simplest practices is pausing. Throughout your day, pause for a few seconds. Feel your breath. Notice your surroundings. Acknowledge your thoughts. This pause interrupts the mechanical flow of autopilot and brings you back into your body. Another practice is mindful attention. Choose one daily activity, eating, walking, washing dishes, listening, and do it fully conscious. Feel every movement, observe every sensation, pay attention to the smallest details. This trains the mind to remain present and strengthens awareness in all areas of life. Meditation is one of the most powerful antidotes to autopilot because it trains the mind to observe rather than react. Even a few minutes of meditation each day can awaken awareness in profound ways. Meditation teaches the mind to return to the present, to detach from automatic thoughts, and to anchor itself in stillness. You must also question your routines. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? Does this serve me? Does this align with my purpose? Conscious questioning breaks the cycle of mechanical living and replaces autopilot with intention. Another key to breaking autopilot is embracing discomfort. Autopilot thrives on familiarity. When you deliberately expose yourself to new experiences, new ideas, new challenges, and new perspectives, you disrupt the mechanical patterns of the mind. Growth occurs outside the familiar. Awareness expands when you step into new territory. You must also limit distractions. The modern world is designed to keep your mind distracted. Notifications, endless scrolling, constant noise. These distractions strengthen autopilot by keeping your mind fragmented. Create spaces of silence. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Spend time without screens. Give your mind room to breathe. Finally, cultivate gratitude. Gratitude brings awareness to what is already present. It awakens appreciation, softens the mind, and illuminates the beauty of the ordinary. Gratitude breaks autopilot because it forces you to notice your life rather than overlook it. Living consciously does not require dramatic changes. It requires small moments of remembrance of presence, of intention, of awareness of your own existence. Strength grows in these moments. Purpose grows in these moments. Fulfillment grows in these moments. A conscious life is not about perfection, but about waking up again and again, refusing to let your days become mechanical repetitions. Autopilot weakens, but awareness empowers. Autopilot numbs, but awareness awakens. Autopilot shrinks your world, but awareness expands it. If this teaching has helped you wake up to the weakening effects of living on autopilot, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss new lessons that deepen your awareness and strengthen your inner path.